Hi, everyone. I have Brad Torgersen here, colloquially known as Chief, given his rank. We're going to talk about my favorite. I shouldn't say favorite because I sound insane, but my perennial topic that I like to keep coming back to over and over again, and that is the Russia-Ukraine situation. So just quickly, just a bit of a sit rep on what's going on in the situation. So it is March 10th, 2022. Right now, Russian elements are on the outskirts of Kyiv. And they're kind of coming from three different axes, one from Sumy, another from along the eastern bank of the Dnieper, and then the western bank of the Dnieper. They're probably likely forming casualty collection points on the western side of Kyiv, and I expect them over the next few days to attempt to fully encircle the city, as well as cut off the main supply routes into the city to prevent the Ukrainian army from getting resupply with javelins, et cetera. The U.S. military in the last week or so has been able to get in another 17,000 javelins so that the Ukrainians can use that to good effect. And they have been. There's been plenty of video that have been showing, Russian tanks nose to butt, bunching up, doing things that no one in the U.S. military would ever dream of doing, because it would be death, and it's been death for the Russians thus far. So that's kind of in the south.
Convoy operations. Yeah,
in the south, where the ground is, the climate's a little bit drier. So the Russians have, as a result of that, have been having a little bit more success. Thus far, they've seized 2 nuclear reactors. Chernobyl, they've cut off Chernobyl from the grid. One of the nuclear experts in Ukraine thinks that the reactor there has about 3 weeks before it starts overheating and potentially having a radiological incident. They've also seized another nuclear power plant in the south. I could not possibly pronounce the city. Begins with a Z, which again is that cryptic letter that in the Roman alphabet that is painted or spray painted onto multiple tanks and armored personnel carriers. But the Russians have been having a lot more success in the south, but the Ukrainians are still fighting. They're also, it appears that Putin has moved from Plan A, which was a bloodless or anticipated bloodless campaign where he would kind of draw the mass of Ukrainian combat power to the south and the east and kind of, suck them into fighting Russian incursions there, and then having the main effort attacking from the from the north, on the west and east of the Dnieper River, so he could avoid, at least for the most part, a river crossing operation. There's also VDV paratroopers who seized one of the main airports there, so they could use that as a staging point for more of an aerial assault, helicopters, etc. That is obviously failed because, contrary to Putin's initial anticipation, the Ukrainians have fought back and are inflicting enormous casualties on the Russians. And the Russians have, I thought they were 10 feet tall. I was trained to believe they were 10 feet tall, but apparently I fight better than the Russians fight like themselves. So, it's been kind of interesting. I used to think they were 10 feet tall. Now they're bugs, and they can be crushed pretty easily. So with that, that's about as detailed a situation as I can come up with. The other thing I did say is I think Putin is going from Plan A, which is what I just described, to Plan B, which is the Russian way of war,
right?
Which is what we saw in Grozny, and involves shelling, cratering cities, using the Iskander ballistic missiles to fire things in, using BM-21 Grad rockets, all that wonderful stuff. Then completely rubbling the cities and then moving in. I think he's shifted that strategy, and he's also in the South, given that they've had a little bit more success there. He's likely going to try to advance them north as quickly as they can to provide a backstop in southern Kyiv. So that's a long, meandering introduction. But what's next, Brad?
Boy, I've been having a lot of conversations with different people. First and foremost, I want to state that I don't trust a great deal of what I see on social media that is claimed to be, legit. This is my back channel source. There's various accusations of, well, that's pro-Ukrainian propaganda. Well, that's pro-Russian propaganda. For all I know, it could be all propaganda.
Yeah, it's all propaganda.
It may be years before there is a proper accounting for everything that's actually happening. And I think there's a lot of people who have a vested interest in shaping narratives about how this is all going. I mean, if I just speak for my own personal opinion, I think Russia has no business being there. I think Putin has no business being there. I think Putin's instincts are terrible. I think his intentions are terrible. Now, having said that, I get it that it's complicated. This part of the world, I mean, Russia has tried and has wanted to absorb its neighbors, and this is an old game that goes back even before the Cold War. I think this is just the latest iteration. I don't want to make predictions about what I think is going to happen because I don't trust the information I'm getting. I really don't. I've seen some people saying, yeah, the Russians are just, the overwhelming masters of this thing, and they're crushing resistance right and left, and they're kicking butt, and of course they're amazing. And then, of course, I see completely opposite claims and evidence, rabbit ears around evidence saying, the Russians are inept, their training is bad, their equipment's worse, their supply lines are completely overstretched and falling apart. It's a complete mess. Now, my gut says that that's actually probably not too off from the truth, just because if you've been around a minute or two in the world of military logistics, I came out of a sustainment brigade into my present job I'm doing now. And I was exposed to the world of logistics planning. I'm not a logistics guy, but I was exposed to the world of logistics planning and everything through that sustainment brigade. And even for a first rate, and I do believe the US military does it better than most, even for a first rate operation, logistics is wickedly hard. And we have all the money we could burn on logistics. The Russians don't. They are a very poor country to be doing what they're doing. And that tells me that their logistics suck, their supplies suck. I very much doubt that the training that the Russian military gets in 2022 is anywhere close to what it was in, say, 1960 or 1970. So I'm very much questioning how long they can keep doing this before all of this catches up with them in a very bad way for them. I think Ukraine is in a perfect position to burn them out in the long term. Even if the city falls, even if the leadership is either, they flee, they decamp to some other country and there's a leadership in exile, or if they're captured even. I mean, I almost want to say that would be like history loves martyrs, right? So if the Ukrainian leadership is captured, and especially if they're captured and killed, well, then you have martyrs, and martyrs live forever and inspire the resistance that just grinds the Russians up, over months and maybe even years. Again, I don't think, and this is just me talking, I don't think the Russians have what it takes to do this in the long run. And I agree with you completely that I think Putin has been shocked by the length of time this has taken and continues to take. And I think every week that it stretches out, the tougher it's going to get for his officers to try to keep this thing going and to manage it. I also think the morale of his people is going to deteriorate severely. That's my suspicion. I could be completely wrong. I'll definitely put that caveat on there. I'm just kind of talking from my suspicions, and I am a bit of a dime store historian where the Cold War is concerned, and I look at what they have now to work with versus what they had, say, in like 1982, and they're nowhere even close, in my opinion, to what they had then in terms of manpower, training, money. It's a shoestring army. I don't trust the ability of a shoestring army to overwhelmingly crush an opponent, especially like Ukraine, where I think historically they're a people who are used to being occupied, and they know how to do this. I think as a culture, they know how to do this. They know how to win the long game. And I suspect that's what this may turn into, is a really ugly occupation that goes on for months or years, and eventually it falls apart. Maybe that's just my wishful thinking, because I guess if I have to pick a side, I pick Ukraine just because I don't think countries should get invaded by other countries. I don't believe that there's a valid reason for Putin to be doing what he's doing, and I don't believe there's a valid reason for the Russians to be there. And frankly, I feel bad for all the Russians that are getting hurt and killed in this thing, because many of them, it's not their decision, it's their government's decision. And I really feel bad for a lot of the Ukrainian civilians who are getting hurt and killed and displaced because of this, because it's, for 30 years, they've enjoyed relative freedom in comparison to the Soviet area. And here we are, and it's like freaking the invasion of Czechoslovakia all over again. Woohoo!
Well, then, Brad, you'll be very upset to hear that it's now okay on Facebook and Instagram to advocate for the killing of Russians. Yeah, you believe that? Like, you either say it's okay,
right?
Yeah, you either say it's okay for everybody, or you don't pick a specific group and say, you can't say it's okay to kill the Irish. I'm Irish, by the way, so I can say that.
Sure.
That's not okay, but it's okay to say, murder Russians. Totally okay.
Right.
We'll allow that. We'll allow that today. It's just it is. So there's the domestic political angle. And I don't want to get too much into it, and I don't want to focus on either party. But the thing that, and look, we saw this also in the Iraq War, right? Which was, remember Freedom Fries?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now they're banning Russian dressing, which is not really Russian. Netflix delayed Anna Karenina.
I saw that. Yeah.
Right. Oprah took out War and Peace from her book club. It's just
stupid. It's stupid.
Guys, this is one guy. This is one guy imposing his will. It's not an entire group of people.
Correct.
And but it's just social media has enabled to easily what's the word for it? Radicalize a population.
Yes.
Right.
Yes,
These are Russians are people too.
Yeah.
Right. They're just a lot of these conscripts are following orders, and they don't,
it's really not their war. They're just told to be there. They're told to do it. I mean, I would bet money that the great majority of the Russians that are in Ukraine right now don't want to be there, aren't particularly interested in taking back, the wheat fields and getting back the breadbasket. They're just there because they're told to be there. And you're right. There's a large conscript component to that military. That's another reason I suspect they're not up to the task of doing this long term, because you just don't get the quality of discipline and motivation that you would necessarily with an all volunteer force. Now, maybe that's just me being a bit of a homer for our setup that we've enjoyed for the past few decades, because it is an all-volunteer force. And I've debated this in a friendly fashion with other people who say, well, we need a draft again. And sometimes I think, well, yeah, it would be great from one standpoint only, because more people in our culture would have the military experience. And the World War II generation had kind of it was an overlapping experience and an overlapping culture that bound us together in a way that we don't have now. But at the same time, when you got a whole bunch of people in the military that don't want to be there and are hating the experience, I mean, it's hard enough with the current volunteers. How do you keep a 22-year-old who joined because he didn't have any other options? And I hate to say it, but we all know that this is true. There's a great many people that join because they think they don't have any other options, and they don't necessarily want to be in, but they are. I mean, and that's us. So over in Russia, it's an even worse situation. So I don't doubt that they don't want to be there. Many of them, maybe even most of them, don't want to be there. They don't want to fight. They don't want to die. They don't want to kill people. I don't buy into this, oh, the Russians are horrible through and through. I do think Putin again, I think he has terrible instincts, and I think he has terrible motives. But like you said, he's one guy. He's one person. He doesn't represent the whole of Russia forever and ever. And it's silly and strange seeing, we're going to, we're going to get rid of frickin' books or movies, or we're gonna pull a frickin' Disney film because it's based on a historical Russian royalty. All of that American reaction is so weird to me because it doesn't do any good and it doesn't change anything. Putin doesn't give a crap if anybody does this stuff, I mean,
and here's the irony too. Let's take the Tolstoy example, right?
Yeah,
so,
yeah.
Like Putin is actually the exception to kind of the Tolstoy classic story, which is that Tolstoy was was an author or writer who didn't believe in the great man kind of thesis, right? Which is like that the Napoleons of the world are the ones who drive the forces of history. What he believed is that there was that the underlying, like the people and the culture, force and propel that leader into the future, right? So, if that Tolstoy kind of theme is applied to the situation, like Putin is screwed.
Yeah.
Right, because Russia's being pulled to the west, and he's pulling it back into that Eurasian kind of concept of what Russia is.
Right, he has staked out. We're Russians. We are Eastern. We are not Western Europe at all. Screw Western Europe. No, we're Russians through and through. He's made it plain that he considers any kind of NATO anything bad for him and bad for his country, and he doesn't like NATO, and he doesn't want NATO sucking in any of the states adjacent to Russia. And he's going to,
and to be fair, he's not wrong, right?
No. If you're in his shoes, this makes perfect sense. This is the part of it that I think a great many. I don't even want to call them analysts because I don't know how much analysis is really happening. A great many American domestic commentators, they don't sit and look at it from his standpoint. And in my opinion, you have to do that. This is why I worry about the State Department, because I'm not convinced the State Department is doing this much at all. It's much more comfortable for them to say he's a crazy madman and he's nuts.
Well, I'm sure the CIA is doing it though, right? The DIA and the CIA are doing it.
You gotta hope, right? I don't know. I don't know. You do gotta hope. But I mean, if I was in his shoes, I wouldn't want NATO on my doorstep either. But then again, we could probably spend a whole hour talking about, well, what's the point of having NATO since 1992? Is there a point in having a NATO since 1992?
Well, that gets to the Purnell kind of iron law of bureaucracies.
Yes, right. Once you build an institution, it gets taken over by the apparatchiks, and it becomes a huge thing that you'll never get rid of.
The point of the organization is the organization. Right.
Yeah, I think Jerry was dead on with that, and I think it's very true with NATO. I think you're right. Well, I mean, and at the risk of angering.
Well, not anymore, right? Like it was true until Putin crossed the border, and now,
suddenly
now it's absolutely essential.
Right? Sure. Well, and that's the irony too. And I do think the former president was right to call this out. If you are a member of a defense organization, but you're not going to put your money where your mouth is, you're worthless in that organization. And it is clear, and it's been clear for a long time, that the United States is NATO. The rest of NATO, except maybe Great Britain, I'll give an exception to Great Britain, and that's not just because I've worked with them in the task force, but I do think Great Britain and us are carrying the load. I mean, Germany can't even loft a single squadron of their Typhoons. They've let their capability completely atrophy. It's nothing like it was in, say, 1960, after they had reconstituted the Luftwaffe and they'd reconstituted the army, because they were all expecting, a Soviet invasion any day now.
Mm-hmm.
That's all gone. And how can you be a strong member of NATO if you have to go, okay, come on, United States, come rescue us again. Yeah, we're not actually going to loft any fighters. We don't really have a military to throw at this thing, but you go ahead and do it. Go ahead and take care of that for us. And that's
at the same time, we only had one combat brigade in Europe before we repositioned some of this.
Sure. Right.
So we couldn't even back it up if we wanted to.
Yeah. The Reforger plans got wadded up and thrown away. I mean, I was able to take part in a thing called Anaconda back in Poland 6 years ago, which was interesting because I think it wasn't really Reforger, but there were bits and pieces of Reforger in it, in that it was clearly aimed at being an exercise that would put Putin on notice that, okay, we're in your backyard and we're operating with the Poles hand in hand, and that means Poland is off limits. You cannot touch Poland. I mean, that was the explicit purpose of it. Yeah, you talked about predictions right at the beginning. Who knows? I'm probably the joke on science fiction writers, and I can't remember which writer said this, but it's a quote that I've always thought is interesting, that science fiction writers, we're actually pretty lousy at predicting the future. We're great at imagining possible futures, but we're actually pretty sucky at about predicting the future. So yeah, I don't know what's going to happen.
I'm pretty good. I'm pretty good at it a month out. A month out. I'm serious. Check out. There's an episode I recorded with Sean McFate, who is the guy who wrote New Rules for War. Mm-hmm. And we predicted all of this a month ago.
Oh, okay. Good for you guys.
Actually, more than a month ago. With January 26th. So
sure.
But it's a little harder now that kind of the die has been cast. But I think there's three scenarios. The first is Putin continues to, goes Russian, right? Starts rubbling cities. Mm-hmm. And I think he surrounds and gets Kyiv to capitulate by, I had this date in my head, April 8th.
Okay. So about a month from now. Yeah, about a month. Okay.
Which is, and I've always said the thing would take between 3 and 6 weeks.
Sure.
Okay. That's one option. And that's if we kind of don't give him an off ramp. We don't try to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. He has no honorable way to remove. Right. He's trapped.
Yeah. Like right now, I'm not even sure that the Russian army could defend Russia.
No, they could. I mean, that's the irony. I've thought of that myself. I'm like, if the assets were there and Poland wanted to cross over and get funky, they could, and Russia couldn't do anything about it because all of their assets, well, probably better than 70% are committed to Ukraine, and they can't reposition that stuff overnight. Again, that would be hard enough for us to do, and we've got the capability that's probably at least 1 or 2 orders of magnitude better than theirs. So yeah, I mean, it's if anybody ever wanted to conquer Russia, this would be the time to do it because they're so committed to this. And you're right, Putin doesn't have an off ramp. Now, granted, Putin probably doesn't want an off ramp. I think Putin believes in Putin, and Putin believes in what he's doing. There's no doubt in my mind that he himself thinks this is what they need to be doing, and he's whole hog for it. But the international politics are causing there's no avenues of escape, right? Not really.
Yeah, so in this particular scenario, if he does that, he's going to be in a decade-long guerrilla war.
Sure.
Insurgency in Ukraine.
Yeah. It's
so that's one option.
Sure.
The second option is a Finlandization of Ukraine.
Yeah, right.
And that's if he continues to grind down the Ukrainians and eventually decides to settle on something to the effect of Ukraine becomes neutral.
Right.
They can't join NATO.
Sure.
And I think that's all he's going to get. I don't think he's going to get Luhansk. I don't think he's going to get Donetsk. He may even lose Crimea. Right. In terms of, and that's the position I would take if I were the Ukrainians.
Sure.
Right. And then you have to pay us back for everything you destroyed. So I think that one is, I don't know. I would put the first one at 50%. I would put this one at 40%.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Then there's option 3 or scenario 3, which is at 10%. And that's a coup.
Doubtful. Yeah.
Yeah. Which is why it's 10%. Right.
Doubtful.
But
people forget Putin's popular in Russia. Not with everybody, but he's popular. And, his network will protect him. He's very well networked. He knows how to do this. He was KGB. He set this all up. He's been, there will be no coup. All this talk from our politicians. Yeah. I think it was Lindsey Graham who said, someone needs to go in and take his head off, or some brave soul needs to go. That's never going to happen. They're not going to do it. There's no way.
The only scenario I can think of that happening is Putin's going to have to blame this on somebody.
Yes, he will. Right.
And the most likely candidate for that is Shoigu.
Not sure how I know what that is.
He's the defense minister. So
Shoigu. Okay.
Yeah, Shoigu doesn't have, he never served in the military until now.
Okay.
Right? He was like a civil engineer. He helped build the military to where it is with recruitment and things like that. But he really is not. He was actually involved in the Crimean invasion, and it was a successful invasion, right? So I think if he doesn't realize he's going to be a target of Putin now, he should.
Right.
And I think the sooner he realizes that, he's more likely to act.
Yeah. You could be right. Sure.
Now, again, it's 10%, and it's not as good as the commentators would have you believe. And here's why it's not good. The last thing you want to do, for lack of despite what you see in this particular instance of Russia's exertion of power, right? For the past 20 years, every time Putin's been involved in something, it's been an astonishing success. And I'm not saying that because I'm a Putin-phile and whatever certain elements of domestic politics would say. I'm just saying he is a better strategist than our politicians are.
Oh,
he runs circles around. Okay?
I think at this time in history, it must be said that the United States has elected and our leadership is terrible, right?
I'll put words in your mouth, Brad. We have the most incompetent politicians in history who have access to the most lethal military in history.
Yeah, you're right. You're absolutely right, and it's boggling that we've arrived at this point. The vice president had her much lampooned little Sesame Street explanation of what the war was about. That was embarrassing. It's embarrassing to see. Again, the analysis, big rabbit ears around analysis that's happening. It makes me deeply question. One of my friends described it as it's a bunch of West Wing LARPers. They all watched West Wing when they're in their teens and 20s. And here we are 20 years later, and they're all playing pretend with our national instruments and our national policy. And I can't say I take any of it seriously. If I was Putin, I wouldn't. I think
let me give you a real world example. So again, sure. I keep referring back to Sean McFate, but he's the only one I've interviewed thus far who routinely ends up on Fox News and CNN and stuff like that. Sure. But what I saw in this past week, so I recorded an episode with him, and I asked him a bunch of questions about particularly on the Ukrainian International Legion, right? And, I asked about all the implications that you would naturally ask about. What if one of these Americans gets captured? It'll be a propaganda tool. So we had this whole discussion. And then literally a week later, Fox News starts asking the same questions. CBS starts asking. It's almost as if these guys do a search on Sean McFate. And they're like, oh, he was on this podcast on spies talking about X, Y, and Z. We should ask this question. It's almost like they're crowdsourcing like stuff that should be common sense, stuff they should be thinking about, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, what was I saying? I was saying that the situation, like a Putin coup, is not a great thing. No, and the reason is you have more instability inside a nuclear armed country.
Yes.
So as much as people really are acting as if they want that, they do not want that.
Well, it's a bit like, so there's no question that Saddam Hussein was, again, a leader with terrible instincts and terrible intentions. Decapitating his government and then grabbing him and killing him created a vacuum that basically led to ISIS, ISIL, Daesh, however you want to pronounce it. There's many names for the caliphate, as they tried to call themselves. That could only happen in the vacuum that was created by the removal and the destruction of the Ba'athist government. I think with Russia, like you said, you have a nuclear power. Do you really want a nuclear power being run by a bunch of factions who are all warring with each other for control in the absence of the dominant gang lord who is Putin? You got to ask yourself, is the cure worse than the disease? Putin at least will go to a summit meeting with somebody, right? If he's gone and it's a bunch of and it becomes like a freaking mafia family war where the Don is dead and all the capos are warring with each other, and they've got nuclear weapons. I mean, none of them are going to come to the table with the West. They might be launching on each other. They might. I mean, things could get a lot worse than they are now if that power structure is gone. And I don't know that anybody's thinking about that, because again, we're getting analysis. See my big rabbit ears analysis. That to me is not. It's like, no, I think you're not looking at this as a grown up. You're really not from like a standpoint of like world politics. And it does require a great deal of cynicism and calculating. You have to put yourself in the shoes of the person you don't like. And I think that's something our current analysts are terrible at. I think it's been proven that they're terrible at putting themselves in the shoes of people they don't like and thinking like those people. And you have to do that. And I don't know that our current leadership is doing any of that. I don't.
What would you do if you were the U.S. president right now?
I'll
tell you my answer as soon as you tell me yours. But I'm not gonna like throw that out there and not ask you the same question I wouldn't ask myself.
So if I were the U.S. president, I would be putting as many small arms, munitions, fuel, like you said, we're putting javelins. I would just feed that train all day, every day, put as many arms as possible into the hands of as many Ukrainians and whoever else is fighting with the Ukrainians as possible, and just keep that going. I'm not convinced that the so-called sanctions are going to have the effect that's desired, because I think, China and other avenues for sale of oil or other things, I don't think that hurts Putin the way the White House likes to talk like it's going to hurt Putin. But I think if you really want to help Ukraine, you give them weapons. You give them weapons. You give them munitions. You give them fuel. You give them all this stuff. But you have to do that carefully in order to try to keep the nuclear option off the table. And that's that's always been very difficult, right? Since the very first Russian atomic bomb was detonated, we've had this problem where they've got the bomb and so do we. And how do you have a proxy war with somebody without it turning into a full war that envelops Europe and envelops us? The Russian missiles can still reach the United States. Our missiles can reach there. And then what does China do? Who knows what China does? Maybe China just kicks back and watches that whole thing touch off, and then they just kind of laugh because now they're the lone world power that remains, because we've done the unthinkable, and we've nuked New York and nuked DC and nuked Moscow and nuked frickin' how you do that needs to be handled very, very carefully. What's your answer?
I'm going to scare you.
Okay.
So right now, Putin is the weakest he's ever been.
Yeah. Yeah. He's jeopardized, right?
And I think we are in a Sudetenland moment.
Oh.
Like if we could have weakened Hitler in 1938, we probably could have saved a lot more lives.
Sure. Right.
Now, I'm not advocating what many Americans who have like seasoned history and have very strong opinions that we need to go to war with Russia. I think there's a strategic way to do it, and here's what I would do. I would start arming and training the Poles,
which we've already been doing.
Yeah, or the Romanians, but
yes,
I would be training them in insurgent tactics.
Sure.
I'd have special forces on the Polish side of the border, Romanian side of the border, and have them slip through and either join the French or the foreign, whatever, but they would operate in discrete units to harass and destroy Russian equipment.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
The second thing I would do is I would establish a mobility corridor for refugees to leave.
Oh, sure. Right. Yeah.
And I would do that by sending in an American unit to Western Ukraine. And I would say to Putin very plainly, if we see any Russian aircraft anywhere near this thing within a certain, like a very, very clearly defined airspace, we will shoot you down. And then, the Russians being the Russians, right, either wanting to test us or just general, undiscipline, will wander into that airspace and we'll shoot something down.
Right.
And the moment we shoot something down, then we take out as many of those convoys as we can, because, hey, you tried to attack us. We're gonna end this thing as soon as possible. Right. We're limiting this to Ukraine. We don't intend to limit we don't intend to expand this anywhere else, but, happy to come to the table as soon as possible. But if you don't come to the table soon, we're going to keep destroying. It'll give us just enough time to absolutely annihilate the combat power that he has, to at least buy the Ukrainians some amount of time. But again, we can't do it unless he flies over that airspace.
Right.
But the 82nd Airborne, or I would probably have a heavier unit in there because for obvious reasons. But the stated purpose would be to help protect the refugees coming out. And as long as he doesn't violate that airspace, we have to maintain that neutrality. But it also is enough to say, okay, you squirrely son of a bitch, you think you can come into a country like that? We can too. And there's nothing you can do about it.
Sure. And there isn't anything he could do about it. You're right.
Right. And then people don't understand, like, he's a rational actor. And that kind of
No, he's a madman. He's a madman.
No, he's much more rational than our morons. Sorry, I mean they are. They're like, I mean, you saw what happened with Afghanistan. That was not a military failure.
No,
that was a political failure,
Absolutely.
And that was because some dipshit said, "Well, you can only have 2,500 troops." Yeah. Well, if we only have 2,500 troops, we can't defend the largest air base in Afghanistan, which is Bagram.
Yeah.
Right. So we have to have this narrow, tiny little thing in Kabul that is nearly impossible to defend. But it was just because some bureaucrat was like, we must have that. Yeah. It's just like
the bog.
No tactical sense. Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. The bog. So, that arbitrary number. And I mean, so this is a bit of a non sequitur. Here's my question about Afghanistan. Will there ever be a flipple for the $89 billion of equipment, munition, and cash? There was raw cash on pallets sitting there. Now, for those who don't know what a flipple is, so if you're a company commander and you leave so much as a laser printer or a Humvee, and we just didn't come back with it, sir. Oh, you are in big frickin' trouble, and you will get raked trying to justify that loss of equipment. If you're an individual soldier, if you leave your plate carrier, you leave your M4, you don't come back with it. The statement of charges in Article 15 is the least of your worries. And yet somehow not a single not a single officer, whether it was in a plain suit or in uniform, ever had to explain or be or was even grilled even a little bit about all this lost equipment and money and munitions and ammo. And to me, that's just absurd from a standpoint of, okay, us down at the bottom, we are expected to be accountable. We are expected to be responsible. And when we see the top level of our own government being wholly irresponsible and not accountable in any way, shape, or form, that is a terrible thing for our military to be witnessing. I mean, at the ground floor level,
well,
at the level.
Brad, they know better. They're allowed to trade on non-public material information on stocks because it's okay. They have a stressful job. You know, they don't make a ton as Congress people. They need to be like multimillionaires. Come on, Brad. It's a hard life for these guys.
Yeah, my heart bleeds. It bleeds. It really does.
Yeah, but again, nobody will do what I'm suggesting because it takes cojones.
Well, I also think you have to have some cunning, right? I'm not convinced that our leadership has any cunning in this situation.
Right. Notice how that just pushes it just to the edge.
Right.
But not like, look, we're helping refugees here.
Yeah.
You have a problem with, of course you have a problem with helping refugees because you're shelling them, Putin.
It's a morally defensible operation, right? Like from a world standpoint, like from a standpoint of like Amnesty International, or, you know, it would be an operation that would be grudgingly sanctioned by all the world bodies that are concerned with peace and stability. They would have to sanction it.
It also messes with his head. And that's the important thing.
Sure.
The other thing I would do is I would send a flotilla just outside Kaliningrad. I would push some Polish garrisons, you know, that nice little oblast, right? That little enclave that's off on its own, that's surrounded on multiple sides by NATO countries, just to make them think about it. And oh, by the way, the Kuril Islands, you know, there might be some sub-activity there.
Sure.
There might be some Japanese boats and ships that approach. Right?
Sure.
I don't know.
Sure.
I don't know.
Well, when the army's away, the cat will play. I mean, this is what Putin's counting on. And he's not wrong to count on this. Putin is counting on the world being gutless. Yeah. And nobody wants to do anything to him on his flanks. If you're going to pour your whole army into Ukraine and leave your flanks wide open, which he pretty much has, he has no ability to defend anywhere at this point. Again, if you wanted to take over Russia, this is the time to do it.
Yeah, I wouldn't do that. But I think his concerns that we would do something before he did any of this were unfounded.
Right.
But now I think he needs to worry. I think because the other thing too is we're okay at fighting insurgencies, contrary to what people think. Most people think we're terrible at fighting insurgencies. We're actually pretty good at it. It's just insurgencies are very hard to fight.
Yeah.
We are amazing fighting conventional wars. We are unstoppable.
Pretty much.
And I wouldn't say that. But I wouldn't say that before this little incursion into Ukraine. But having seen the Russians in action, I mean, like, you know, there's a video floating around today where there's, you know, 12 tanks and armored personnel carriers, like BIMPs and BTRs. Mm-hmm. And they're literally like on a 2-lane highway in both lanes, nose to butt.
Terrible convoy. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
Right. I mean, like, I was salivating.
Sure.
If I were an A-10 pilot, I would be salivating on this stuff.
Yeah.
So
yeah, this is the kind of convoy ops that even like the most basic National Guard logistics unit is trained on basic convoy ops, and the Russians are doing everything wrong. Right. I agree with you. Yeah. There's basic stuff happening with them that's like, wow, you guys don't know any better. You should, but you don't, or at least your leadership isn't. Yeah. Right. Sure.
I mean, I would be concerned for the safety of the entire Russian nation.
Yeah.
Right. They can't defend themselves. Like, it's obvious they can't defend themselves.
Yeah. It's
all
true.
right. So on this particular topic, Brad, we've kind of gone way over.
Right.
Do you have any last words for the audience on this?
Just again, I feel really, really bad. And I mean this genuinely. I feel really, really bad for the families and the people, both Ukrainians and Russians, who are going to lose their livelihoods. They're going to lose their property. They're going to lose their lives. They're going to lose loved ones for this thing. I think this thing is ultimately going to prove so wasteful. And we're not going to get a full accounting of that for maybe a decade or more, but I think it's going to be so needlessly wasteful. And I know history never stops, and this is another good example of it, but it is a damn shame. It's a real damn shame.
Yeah, it's just bizarre. I mean, imagine you're Ukrainian. You're finally getting a taste of the good life.
Yes.
You have cell phones, you have jobs, you have software, you're a software engineer.
You're a growing company. Yeah. Right. I agree.
And it's a beautiful country, lots of growth. And
yeah,
I mean, it's almost like watching, and that's the thing that the Russians don't have going for them is this is not like watching like Sarajevo, right? Because it was still kind of had that Eastern European flavor, like rundown Soviet kind of second rate.
Yeah.
Like this is like almost like watching a town in the Midwest get carpet bombed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And these people are well educated. And again, you're going to have people claim like, "How come you didn't care so much about the Arabs in the Middle East and this and that?" And
right.
Yeah. Is there some sort of like racial preference that's going on? Probably, right? I'm not just saying with me. I'm just saying like that's why there appears to be more sympathy and things like that.
Well, if you ask Cenk Uyghur from the Young Turks, he thinks it's all racial. That was his analysis. Yeah. Again, big rabbit ears around analysis if you're woke. Okay, sorry. That's my hobby horse. I hate the woke analysis most of all. Yeah.
Yeah. I've been doing my best to avoid all I'm trying to be Switzerland on this, but apparently Switzerland's no longer neutral anymore. So that's the other strange thing about this whole thing.
Sure.
Regardless, thank you. This was great.
No, thank you. I appreciate it. Good conversation.
We'll see how this thing, and then hopefully maybe at some point in the future we'll either get together or have another one of these on this particular topic or some other geopolitical topic. Yeah. So it's a pleasure, my friend.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Talk to you soon.